Good morning, everyone. It's Friday, February 27th, and welcome to 7 Investing Live. This is our live stream event we host every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern to showcase and spotlight several of the stock market's most intriguing opportunities. And a reminder, if you want to see our official recommendations and our monthly best buys, check out 7investing.com, where right now you can get your first 7 days completely free at 7investing.com/subscribe. My name is Simon Erickson. I'm the founder of 7 Investing. I am very excited about our show here today because I get to talk to one of my good old friends. Eric Bleeker is the co-founder of 24/7 Wall Street. He's also been following along with the tech and telecom industry as an analyst for more than 20 years. We're going to be talking today about co-packaged optics and a few stocks for your investing radar. But Eric, I know I speak on behalf of everyone who's watching today when I say I'm excited and welcome to having you on 7 Investing Live this morning.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. It's an exciting time to be here. We've had a lot of stuff going on in the market. So I think we're going to cover a lot of ground today. And I think something like co-packaged optics, it might not sound that exciting on the surface. Trust me, once people hear about it's a very exciting topic. So if this is an area anyone out there hasn't heard about, I'd encourage you to stick around. You're going to be hearing about the next few years. This could be very big.
You need to know about this one, especially since data center infrastructure is moving at light speed. We'll hold that technological pun for just a moment here. And we're also going to be talking about two companies, Lumentum and Applied Optoelectronics, which are two that should be on your investing radar. But let's start 10,000 foot level first, Eric. You know a thing or two about the telecom industry. And if we go back in time about 30 years, America realized that fiber optic cable was a lot more efficient at sending information than copper wires were. And in fact, America spent over $500 billion, with upward estimates of near $1 trillion, on laying fiber optic cable all across the country in an infrastructure buildout that was massive. 39 million miles of fiber optic cable, keeping in mind America is about 3,000 miles from coast to coast. This was a huge project. It kind of laid the backbone for high-speed internet, which of course enabled the internet that we know today over the next 20 years. You're starting to see, though, now optics, which that was one of the early use cases, is now getting into the semiconductor industry and the data center industry and a lot of other places. But tell me, maybe at a 10,000 foot level, why are we so interested in using optics now in data center infrastructure?
Yeah, it's really interesting. You go back to that build out you talked about 500 billion, a trillion, big numbers, whatever it was. It led to around 2% utilization of fiber in that period. And it really led to a massive overhang from that build out of the industry being extremely poor for a substantial period of time. Simon, I managed our technology coverage on Full.com for years. We basically had to have a thing to pay people to read the articles about these companies on the page. Like we would have writers and they kept writing about companies in the optics space. I would say, please, we are losing so much money every time you write about them. So you cannot imagine how wild it is for me to see this inversion. But the point you make here is at that time you had fiber used for, long distances. And the kind of buzzword, or the thing you'll often hear across the technology space is basically copper if you can, optics if you must, because it's expensive. It's very power intensive. And it's something that if you can use power, you can use copper, you should use copper. But what we're seeing is as data center clusters go towards, it kind of makes your eyes go, a million, GPUs in one cluster.
Wow.
It's going to raise the amount of kind of this optics content to the point that right now, the main kind of revenue generator we'll be discussing a little bit more in the show, transceivers, are about 10% your total cost of ownership for a cluster. So if we're talking about hyperscalers spending $700 billion in CapEx this year, I don't need to do that math for anyone. That's a big number, and it's a big number that's growing extremely quickly. And we're going to have a lot of numbers on this show that are going to blow people's minds. But Simon, that's kind of the total opportunity, that optics is increasingly being used in AI data centers. And this usage, there's a couple key catalysts in the next few years that are going to present specific high growth rate verticals.
It is amazing. It is mind blowing, like you said, Eric. The scale of and the magnitude of what's going on out there. Just a reminder for everyone watching. Optics is actually converting electrical signals into light. Optics is the use of light to transmit information, and so as opposed to using copper, which is transmitting electric signals, which are very hot, very inefficient, you would actually use a fiber optic cable. And the kind of the early use cases, you would actually send these subsea cables across continents, which are only about this big in diameter, but sending so much information so much more efficiently. That is of preeminent interest for data center infrastructure, where every percentage point of efficiency gains is super important because of the magnitude, like you just mentioned, of the cost of these. And so if you can actually use what we're now calling co-packaged optics within the servers themselves to transfer information from an electrical signal, convert it into light optics, and then send that information wherever it needs to go within the data center, that's a much more efficient way of doing it, right, Eric? And this is now a way we've figured out how to kind of put that into the same chips right alongside with the GPUs and the AI accelerators to do this much more efficiently. If I'm oversimplifying that, I apologize, but I think
no, that's a great check on me, because I probably got a little bit too nerdy there without giving proper context.
I nerded out right there with you. Yep.
Yeah. So basically, with copper, there's going to be because, as you said, you're pushing light instead of electricity. When you're pushing electricity, you've got atoms, you've got thermal management. You only have so much bandwidth. So there's just limitations with copper that within data center use cases you haven't run into. So you've got different areas that you can use optics. So you can use it for connecting across a larger networking system. And that would be kind of what you'd call scale out. But then you also have scale up, which is within a node. And what NVIDIA's done is they have used extreme engineering to use copper as far as they can push it to the breaking point, to where with their next iteration, their next system, they're going to reach kind of a logical endpoint for where they need to start looking for alternative technologies. And that's where you're going to see a lot more optics usage, specifically co-packaged optics. I don't know. Do you want me to explain kind of what co-packaged optics is? And
keep going. Let's talk about how these are getting closer to the core processing GPUs of the servers themselves. Yep.
Yeah, precisely. So there's always been this kind of holy grail of the optics industry that they make these pluggable transceivers.
And Heather, if we could put up the graphic in the background, perhaps while Eric's describing a lot of these. Keep going, Eric. We got a nice little graphic.
Yeah, that's
nerding out as you talk about this.
Yeah, so this is this from TSM right here? Is this one of their slides, or?
I'm not sure where we got this one from. I pulled it up just as something to show in the background if you wanted a visual as we describe the trenches of what's going on.
Yeah. So the holy grail has always been where the revenue comes from right now is these pluggable transceivers. But as you noted, it's all about the conversion of light to electrical signals. And what happens with pluggables, they basically plug into the back, but then there's a gap where you're going to need an additional electrical run. It might sound trivial when we're talking about this length, but it turns into massive signal loss, which means you need to have processing, specifically digital signal processors. They end up using tremendous amounts of energy. So it's just like, Simon, right now we're going through this new phase in semiconductors. If you've been following semiconductors for a long time, it was always, how small can we get this? What's our next process node? Are we how much lower are we getting in this kind of nanometer scale that we're moving down? But we're moving to an era where this advanced packaging is responsible for a lot of innovation. In memory, a lot of people have this mistake that they think high bandwidth memory, the innovations, there's some kind of breakthrough in the actual memory cells. That's not true. The breakthrough is the packaging and how close you can get the memory to the die. And that's what they're searching for optics, is how close you can get your actual compute die. But the problem is silicon, it doesn't produce light. So you've needed extreme engineering to be able to do this. And what we've had recently is some breakthroughs and some companies that are going to be able to facilitate this kind of progression to co-packaged optics. So once co-packaged optics come, it's being pushed heavily by NVIDIA, and we could talk about that more in a little bit. Broadcom is a big backer of this. Marvell just made a major acquisition with Celestial AI. Once this happens, it's going to move a lot of the areas that right now are transceivers into co-packaged optics. And it's going to have a lot of content behind it. So as you can see on the slide right here, you're seeing the architecture of it. And I know that this is probably complex for people to see. But again, if you look on the far left, you see that pluggable module, you see the distance to where you'd have your processor. And with co-packaged optics on the far right, you see it all on the same substrate, and you see how close that optical engine is right to your processor. And these sound like small details, but they're going to be details that translate to tens of billions of dollars of revenue in the coming years.
Yeah, thanks for the graphic, Heather. We can pull it back down. So if we have anyone else who hasn't fallen asleep, I hope that everyone's highly caffeinated as Eric and I have gotten into the trenches of the technology. But I think it's important, though, right? This is a huge technological innovation in one of the most important sectors globally, which is worth, like you said, tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars. Semiconductor industry is now approaching $1 trillion annually. So any kind of efficiency improvements using optics for data transmission, super important. We will talk in a moment about two companies, Eric, that you brought up that we're going to talk about on the show here. Lumentum is the first one, and the second is Applied Optoelectronics is the second. But, we did have Robert Quinn on the show a couple of weeks ago, and, he's been installing data centers for 30 years. He was the actual guy that, would put on the gloves and get in there and actually build the fabs. And he says Moore's law is dead. He says that, we can't get any smaller transistors. As you start getting down to 1 nanometer or even smaller than that transistors, there's interference of what the physical capabilities of these things is. And so the only solutions are to be more creative in design. Advanced packaging, as you just mentioned, is certainly one of the most important parts of the industry. If we're going to continue to innovate and allow for the computation power that's required for AI. Before we get into that, I want to give a little bit of a plug for some of the good work that you're doing at 24/7 Wall Street. Like I said, I've known you, I think, Eric, for about 15 years now. You've always been cutting edge, man, when it comes to semiconductor. I know you've got an AI podcast, but kind of tell me a little bit about 24/7 Wall Street if I want to follow along with some more of the stuff that you're looking at out there.
Sure, yeah. 24/7 Wall Street, it was founded around, it's existed since 2011. So it's been around for a long time. Me and my group of partners have been working on the website. It's a free resource. We don't have any premium products to sell. We leave that for the people like you, Simon. So it's more of a news source for people to be able to go to. And we do things like, for example, live blogs every single day. I'll go in. I did one for AOI yesterday, Applied Optoelectronics. When they said something on their conference call, I said, this stock's only up 16%. That's crazy. I think it's going to open up a lot more now, open up 40% today. So you're getting real-time news from experts following things. And then, like you said, we have other resources like the AI Investor Podcast. I had Simon on for one of the episodes. Got a lot of compliments around that. Everyone loves Simon.
You're too kind, Eric.
So, and yeah, basically on that one, we keep a portfolio to be able to track the show, which, I don't think there's a lot of podcasts that would not only follow the news, but be able to actually offer kind of ideas along with it. So if anyone really likes AI, it's very much focused on that. Whereas again, 7 Investing's much more of a cross investing solution. But if you want more ideas around AI, we will go into these nerdy details. We will talk about things like co-packaged optics because this is a trend so much for this time. And why I wanted to originally kind of do this podcast was so many people felt confined to NVIDIA and similar ideas, but there's such an incredible collection of companies across the space and ideas. So, we'll talk about some here, but so if anyone's looking for additional news sources right now, you go across the internet. So much of it is you search something for Google, the results are trash. They are absolute trash. You go on Twitter, people now, if you don't pay to boost your signals, you only get a few hundred people. It's hard to find people with real signal. So I know people are getting lost without good resources. And that's what we're trying to do, just a place people can go to be able to find out what's going on in the market and what stocks are moving as a result of it. So that's kind of the elevator pitch for 24/7 Wall Street.
Love it. Love it. www.247wallst.com. That's 24/7 Wall Street. If you do want to go check that out. Big fan of everything that you're doing there, Eric. And I mean it when I say you're cutting edge, because it wasn't that long ago that you and I took a trip out to California. We visited NVIDIA when they were talking about this new thing called machine learning that was going to be a pretty big deal Turns out that AI and machine learning was in fact a really big deal, and NVIDIA was right at the forefront of doing that. But if NVIDIA is now a huge company, it's been a very fantastic investment for anyone who's held on, certainly since we found it years ago. I think it's interesting, a lot of the research and the coverage that you're doing on mid-cap or even small-cap companies that are not named NVIDIA, they're not named AMD, they're not named Taiwan Semi, but are still participating in these trends and have got huge upside that could be related to them. One of them that we just mentioned a little while ago that you also mentioned, Applied Optoelectronics. The ticker on that one is AAOI. Very timely that we're talking about it because it's up 39% right now this morning as we're filming. They just announced fourth quarter earnings that were the strongest year in the company's history. Tell me a little bit about Applied Optoelectronics. What do I need to know about this company, Eric?
So this is such a good story just about broader industry growth. I've been following AAOI for a while.
Since $7 a share, I believe, right? So you've got a 10 bagger on this one now.
I've got some calls back there, and in the portfolio for the podcast, we had at 22. So they did their earnings last night, and you see the figures, you see what last quarter was, you see guidance for the quarter ahead, and then they're doing their earnings call, and they start breaking down these numbers. Simon, they say we believe by mid 2027 we'll be doing $378 million a month in transceiver revenue, which we talked about this being a main product for optics. Well, they just finished a year that their revenue was $456 million. So they're saying effectively, we think we can grow demand by tenfold in the next 16 months. And they also gave guidance pointing to increasing margins. So Simon, what Applied had done was they were investing. It's interesting. It's what your thesis is going to be. And if your thesis was, I believe artificial intelligence is going to be a much more substantial trend, I want to be buying companies that are actually investing aggressively, because one of the biggest threats to artificial intelligence is that companies like a Taiwan Semiconductor had held up a lot. You look at semiconductor equipment last year, the companies that make the machines to build these chips. When I had talked with you on the podcast, you were talking about ASML, which had been stagnant, and everyone's going, AI is taking off. Why is the company with the greatest monopoly on earth not outperforming? And it was because all of these companies at the beginning of the supply chain were actually being extremely conservative, which was causing the semi-equipment space, which has historically been a great investing opportunity, to be stagnant. But I saw Applied, they were being very aggressive about building out and having a plan. So last year, they got some investments and guarantees from hyperscalers, especially Amazon. And now it's just translating into sales because they're an American company. Geopolitical climate, people want American suppliers. A lot of their competition is Chinese. They're looking to push their American supply chain up over 30%. And what they're going to get, there's nothing inherently special about this company, Simon. It's just the industry and kind of their placement at. And if you identified that beforehand, you were just able to get in before this potential for growth. Can they hit that number? I don't know. That's a crazy number. That is absolute. I mean, if they hit that number, they're probably up another 400% from here. I saw them up 16% last night. I said, what the? I listened to hundreds of calls a year. That might have been the most jaw-dropping thing I've heard on a call. So I don't know, Simon. The biggest reason I wanted to talk about this was just to share with the listeners, we're talking about this growth, and then you get to see it in action, that a company saying, we believe we will be doing in a month close to what we're doing in a year, in 16 months. That is what's at stake. And that is how much this optics opportunity continues to grow as a portion of this AI build out.
This is the holy grail if you're a small technology company, is that you jump from being the early adopters to being the early majority. This is the crossing the chasm for those who follow Clayton Christensen and Disruptive Innovators. Is something that, if you have a really neat technology, if you have a neat technology that then catches on with the hyperscalers and the people that are spending billions of dollars, and they come to you and they say, hey, how much of this can you give us as soon as possible? That's where you get 10x revenue in less than a 2-year period, like you just mentioned. It sounds jaw-dropping, but if you're a small company and all of a sudden you hit it big in one of the hottest sectors of the market, that's exactly, I think, why you see a company like AAOI up 40% here today. And Eric, we talked about them last time on the podcast. I remember you mentioning that company as I was talking about ASML. Both of those stocks I've done pretty good for investors in
I
a
like
couple of
it.
months.
It's almost as good as our call before this season of a Seahawks versus Patriots Super Bowl.
Oh, we
So
did. We
I
said the
do have to
Seahawks
point
and
it
the
out. That
Patriots.
did happen.
We did. I think I remember that conversation. The Patriots are going to be one of the most improved teams in the league, and the Seahawks are going to the Super Bowl. Congratulations, by the way,
Thank you,
lifelong
sir.
Seahawks fan, Eric Bleeker. Let's talk about Lumentum also. And by the way, one last comment on applied optoelectronics. You mentioned that they're transceivers, so I interpret that as they are converting an electrical signal into an optical signal, electricity into light, if you will. Is this a technology that they're selling to the data centers? Or are they licensing this to an NVIDIA? Or how are they making money? Where does this fit in the bigger picture of what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, their customers are hyperscalers.
Yep.
They've been rapidly expanding across that. They had started with a small collection. Now they said they're engaged with 5 hyperscalers. So they've kind of rapidly moved across the entire supply chain. And they're trying to, Simon, we'll get into this a little bit with Lumentum, but the differentiator is largely the lasers in this space. And they're trying to push in a little bit more there. They're not a company I ever loved because they have specific advantage. They're a company I love because of their positioning in the industry. And you can win multiple ways investing, and we're seeing one way to win with them and one largely different way to win with a company like Lumentum.
Let's talk about that one next. Applied Optoelectronics, by the way, AAOI, if you want to follow along with that one. Really cool, kind of small cap company, up big today. Eric, let's talk about the other one, Lumentum, LITE on this one. This is another company that's now doubled. Its stock price has doubled in the last month, just in
Yeah,
2026 alone.
I think we had put this in our AI portfolio. I could look up. I think it's up like 700%. I had an expert on who was a former sell side analyst early in like April last year just to cover optics specifically. And like I was saying earlier with the You Campaign one read, it was the lowest viewed podcast we've done. And it's the best result. Everything that was discussed on that episode's up 300 to 1,000%. This is often you can find stuff in unloved niches, but Lumentum, they're really interesting. So the headline and why everyone's chasing it right now, NVIDIA is going to be pushing co-packaged optics. They're starting kind of small. They started with one of their switches. They're about to do GTC, which is going to happen, I think, March 16th. They're going to expand it out to their Ethernet lineup. It's believed in 2027, they're going to then move this into that kind of scale-up opportunity I've talked about earlier, which will really put the jets on this revenue. Right now, Lumentum is their sole supplier for co-packaged optics.
Mhm.
It's still very much in a validation period for the technology. I would expect they will multi-source this in time. Other companies will compete like Coherent, but Lumentum has the best laser technology. As of today, they have the best laser technology. And as I noted, part of this optics kind of package, this co-package optics, is you need this external laser source. So people are looking at them as NVIDIA's sole supplier for a product line NVIDIA is betting absolutely big on. The marketing rights itself. They also are in the Google complex where there's something Google does called optical circuit switching, and they're getting a lot of revenue from Google as well. So Simon, I think they started because everyone was looking for those TPU plays. You saw Celestica booming last year. You saw basically everything that was TTM Technologies was another big one. You saw all that stuff running off. Lumentum was part of that. And now I think they're getting a secondary because in their if you I know you followed the semiconductor industry for a while. The companies on their calls, like Coherent on their last one, they're like, our book to bill ratio is 4. Like you used to
Unbelievable.
hear a
High.
1.5 and you're like, whoa, this
Yeah.
company's cooking. 4 on these kind of products. And Lumentum saying they're booking, their factor is 30% higher than demand or whatever with incredible growth. So these companies aren't the only limiting factor right now is the ability to supply. And Simon, this is what's so interesting too. So Lumentum, for example, the biggest problem is exactly what you're just mentioning. They've doubled this year. They're trading at 25 times sales for a semiconductor company. But the other side of this, I wrote it down, their earnings expectations, 101 last year, 206 in adjusted EPS this year. Wall Street has them within the next 2 years, 1709. That's a 17-fold jump in profitability in 4 years. And it is because of the market, is their specific specialization. But all these areas, if you look at this, if you're saying, Well, thanks for bringing me these stocks that just went up 500%, you jerk, which I'm sure some people are saying to me right now. There's a lot of other ways to play this because there's this whole chain. One of the companies I had talked about recently was an Axtron, which does vapor deposition. Uh, they're traded in OTC in the US, but also a German company. And they have unique specialization, specifically around the materials for optics. With optics, you don't go through, I mentioned earlier, you don't go through the silicon supply chain. There's this company that makes the wafers for this industry named AXT, and it started getting bubbled up on Twitter. Um, and it went up 2000% like 3 months. So everyone's looking for these bottlenecks. And a lot of people are overlooking like a lot of the bottlenecks in specifically semiconductor equipment. And Simon, advanced packaging, it's about to go through this mega cycle where there's a lot of use cases where you're gonna have advanced packaging for high bandwidth memory. You Memory is so expensive because these companies haven't been investing in production. They're gonna be investing in production. A lot of these advanced packaging players are gonna get so many bites of the apple. They're gonna get CPU growth because like AMD using chiplets, and you're gonna have a lot of advanced packaging there. You're gonna have memory. And then right as soon as that's going, you're going to have co-packaged optics. So, sorry, it's very exciting. If people see these optics companies and they say, well, they run up a lot of ends, there's so many opportunities. There's so many ways to play this. It's a really cool space right now.
The joke remains true, Eric, that if you're stuck somehow in the middle of a desert island in the middle of the ocean and you can only get 4 letters into the sand, don't write help. No one's going to show up. Write DRAM and you'll be surrounded in a moment by everyone who's very interested. Memory is certainly one of the bottlenecks in this industry. It's great to see optics catching on here as well. I'm going to open it up. We're at the end of the call here. We're going to have an open session for questions. Heather, I'll bring you in here in a moment if you'd like to ask a question. But I'm going to ask the first one, Eric, because we have seen optics for decades. I even remember 10 years ago, it was 10 years ago, I was up in DC and I spoke with an expert in the optics industry, and he actually thought it was going to be used for the healthcare industry, for genomic sequencing, which was also got its own bottlenecks for, computational power and things like that. It seems like it sat stagnant for a decade. There were places for lasers and optics and things like this. And then all of a sudden, you've got all of this kind of pent up demand that now hits this inflection point. What should we be watching if we're looking as investors at Lumentum and Applied Optoelectronics? Are we looking for that book to bill ratio? Are we looking for new contracts they're signing with hyperscalers? What are you interested in as an investor that you think we should be keeping a specific eye on?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. One of the areas is for Applied Optoelectronics. For them, it was how they are setting up this supply chain and preparing for this demand boom. And they're kind of prepared to be the company that's ideally positioned in this kind of geopolitical setup. For them, they're starting to try and move into co-packaged optics as well. So you're going to be able to watch that. And then for a company like Lumentum, it largely is how many more customers are they beginning to add when they talk about this co-packaged opportunity. Watch what management says about demand. A lot of management, all these companies, there was such a significant trough last year. I think from where I had first bought Lumentum, it was down 50% during the kind of tariff tantrum or whatever we want to call that. You have an opportunity right now. I really do believe that if you're able to, even if it's really known that a technology is going to be broadly applicable to where AI data centers are going. And you mentioned optics kind of being this perpetual loser. Well, yeah, because it had kind of one use case of transmitting data. I mean, a single cluster has more data exchange than all east-west connections across the United States. So that's why it's worth so much more. It took a fundamental shift. So, I would just watch because I do think in some of these spaces like co-packaged or co-packaged optics one, but advanced packaging, you everything looks so perfect on paper, but if you can still get in before that kind of revenue curve begins, generally people don't start flooding into it until that kind of growth is a reality. And between a lot of trends across AI, there's a lot of things that are going to begin inflecting very soon. And I still believe investors have an opportunity to get in before that inflection begins.
It is very intriguing right now how fast the data center infrastructure is building out. I am going to open it up now, Heather, to the audience. I do see we have some questions that have been asked. I'll hand it over to you.
We sure do. All right. First off, we can just hop on. Jax293 just said it was very informative. They've been enjoying the show. So thank you, Jax. All right. We've got Michaela5628 saying price target bull base/bull case for light, which was
That's Lumentum, I believe.
Lumentum.
Yeah,
Yes.
Lumentum.
Sorry,
Yeah,
just
okay.
completely was
What do you
going
think,
to go
Eric?
find it for
You got a
us.
price target, or you got any idea on what this stock is worth?
The reality is, if I'm deploying capital right now, I own Light. I didn't add to it in the most recent round. I just think a lot of the suppliers at the beginning of the supply chain, like Axtron, are better purchases at this specific moment, because Lumentum has risen so much. It's an incredible company. It's just where I'm focusing my attention right now is probably in a little different areas of the supply chain. And I kind of bring up Lumentum more as just an example of what has happened in the space and the opportunity across a lot of parts of it that still exists. Same thing for applied optoelectronics. I mean, we're getting to talk about a day that's up 40% in a single day.
Now, can I ask a second level question on that one, which I think is a good follow up? This is a more challenging question for you, Eric, but we're familiar with the hype cycle too, where you want to catch companies that are right there in demand, hitting the point of inflection, really exciting. But we also don't want to overpay for something where expectations are super high and then they can't reach those expectations. And sometimes the market punishes those types of companies. How do you differentiate if a company is really legit, like the demand is there? You said 10x in 2 years in terms of revenue. That seems really exciting. But how do you also avoid maybe stepping on a landmine where you're paying a premium for something that doesn't work out? How do you differentiate between true opportunity and hype cycle?
Yeah, I mean, I do think right now, specifically in the AI space, the trend in the vertical matters a substantial degree. So being able to find something like co-packaged optics that has a backer like NVIDIA that's going to put so much attention to it, as going to get this industry buy-in, is going to offer you a lot more certainty than a lot of unproven ideas. You know, there's a lot of small companies in the space that you'll see investors go to. I am starting to see some stuff that looks a little like 2021-ish. We all remember how that felt. There's one account on Twitter. They seem very smart, but they'll mention stocks that are in the supply chain and they'll jump 100% in 2 days. And you know, that is at times, like that AXT company I mentioned that's doing these wafers. They're up 2,000%. Do they have a great opportunity in a bottleneck? Yes. Are they going to be able to justify that valuation over the long term? I'm not sure about that. And you know, there's a big difference between a company that maybe has an advantage for a specific compound or material versus a company like an Axtron that has a very specific specialization that would take years to catch up to and is going to see massive growth via their industry. So you're protected by the fact they have a specialization in an industry that's suddenly seeing a step change. So, you know, I think that kind of opportunity goes that next level in protecting you from that hype cycle that you see a lot of people really chasing right now in areas like Twitter.
And one final support on that I wanted to add too is this is real technology that you're actually seeing applied in those data centers. This is not just Long Island iced tea changing its name to Long Blockchain and the stock goes up 1,000% in a week. This is actual technology being deployed by the largest players. So great points there too. Back to you, Heather.
All right, we've got one that is CRSR ? From Michaela. Again, is that Corsair Gaming?
I believe that is the ticker for that. That one's off my radar. Any thoughts on that, Eric? Maybe that's a
Do
tangential.
they have anything to do with that, or is this a whole different stock for?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm just not familiar with how Corsair.
No, all good. They had some other questions. I was just wondering if that was a OTF stock or something that on another.
I mean, here's how weird stuff is right now. People are buying a toilet maker in Japan because their ceramics have applications to AI. So maybe there's stuff going on. There's
That
so much
we
to follow on
don't
a daily
know.
basis.
AI everywhere.
All right. We have other questions, so we will hop on. I'm sure there was something wonderful that we just don't know. All right. From Jax293. Oh, please show. There we go. I am from India. Which book would you suggest if I want to understand the AI industry?
Well, I think Simon would have an excellent answer for this, but I would just start the one default book I'll always suggest if you're going especially into the kind of physical elements of chips and data centers would be Chip Wars by Chris Miller. It's a wonderful book for understanding the long-term dynamics of the industry, the players. Oh, there we go. Look at that.
Yep.
See, I should have just gone directly to Simon. Why do I even bother talking?
No, you gave me the perfect segue and setup, right? When you were saying, hey, Simon's probably got it back there. Oops. And I mean, there's a lot of books, written by kind of the experts and the academics in this space that have now gone out and said, there's something to this. Chip War was an excellent idea, Eric. That's the same one I would have gone for too.
All right. Do you have any other books, Simon?
Just the innovator's dilemma that we mentioned earlier. Eric and I were talking about, when something like this catches on, it tends to go in stages. You kind of have this early majority where people see a technology that's neat, but they don't have any money to do anything with it. But then it starts catching on. Then Elon Musk all of a sudden starts using that. And then all of a sudden, everybody's talking about it everywhere. That seems to be the case of at least what I'm seeing in optics for a lot of these applications.
Gotcha. All right. Just to throw it up here, because I did finally find it, the Axitron, how you spell it, and ticker in the US. And we do have a couple more questions. All right. From show on stream. From George Aragon 8053. Do you still think it is a good idea to enter and those? Oh, please come back. Show on stream. And these are all the lovely companies we've talked about today. The Applied. All right, you guys got to go with these. I cannot say that stock.
I'll just quickly. So for optics, if AAOI, I think they're a $4 billion company. I would need to look. When you're up 40%, I might be slightly off. 5, I guess, at this point. They're guiding towards, if they can hit these targets, a $4 billion top line by, that. I know it's crazy that stock this up this much. You could say probably still has some opportunity, but I don't think it's unreasonable at this point. I recently bought Axtron. As I said, I'm looking a lot more at the equipment space. I probably won't add light at this moment. Personally, if you do want to add it, they do have incredible technology advantages, but I would keep it relatively limited. There's a company that probably doesn't have quite as good of technology, but is a little bit more diversified, named Coherent, if you want to buy a package. And one company I haven't mentioned that's a little bit more conservative, but kind of wins. They're kind of the Taiwan semiconductor of optics in terms of being able to create designs, is Fabrinet. So that's another one with maybe not the upside, but just an incredible opportunity to win across themes. And then looking at the advanced packaging companies as well, a lot of them are going to have one that I recommended recently was an Onto Innovation. They're going to have a massive opportunity in the coming year for high bandwidth memory. And then once their roadmap gets towards 2027, 2028, they will then get a secondary opportunity in advanced packaging for co-packaged optics. So a lot of ways to play this. I know we talked about those companies because they're on the leading edge. They're the excitement about the recent gains. But this is not the limitation to the market. This is a very diverse market with a lot of opportunities. Onto Innovation, if you want that ticker as well, that would be ONTO. I don't know if I mentioned any other companies there. I think that's it.
Fabrinet, Eric.
Fabrinet, FN.
Okay. Anything else, Heather? Any other questions you want to get to here?
And all those tickers will be in the show notes when this is published, by the way. No, that is all of the questions. We've hit all of them, and we are past time. So I feel like all mine have been answered. Thank you so much.
Eric, that was a fun show, man. I really appreciate you bringing a new technology to all of our listeners and talking about what's going on with co-packaged optics. Really appreciate you being here with 7 Investing this morning. Thanks for being part of the show here.
Yeah, and I would say as well, I was talking about this moment right now where it's feeling a little 2021, where it is just a lot of people looking for this kind of next breakthrough. There's never been more of a necessity for trust in the
Mhm.
financial space. I will say, if anyone out there isn't a member of Seven Investing, I'm proud to call Simon a friend. But when I worked at the Motley Fool, we had so many analysts, and for a long time, my job there was packaging up themes. And Simon was the person I would go to, and Simon's someone I deeply trust. And you're building a great product. You've built a great product with Seven Investing, and you're investing the right way. You're investing for people to win over the long term. So I would just say, if anyone here liked what we've been talking about today, I really do think Seven Investing is a great product, and for people to go and check it out, because you know it is just I think we're at such an important moment of where the world's heading the next 5 to 10 years, and what disruption is going to do. And someone with a track record like you, Simon, for being able to find the right stocks in these kinds of transformative moments has never been more important. So I thank you for the kind words, but I would also want to offer my own about what this moment means, and what kind of trust people are going to need, and where this world's headed the next 5 years. And I think Seven Investing fits very well into that. So that's all I have to say as well.
Oh, Eric, thank you so much for the kind words, man. And right back at you. I think it is super important. There's thousands of tickers every day. You can always buy in the stock market. You want to figure out, you want to have somebody that you can trust with credibility that knows, what is worth looking at and which ones are just being pumped out there. And your coverage has certainly helped me a lot too, differentiate the two of those, even as we go back as former colleagues decades ago. And here we are in 2026 talking about cool stuff going on in the tech industry. So Eric
Hey,
Bleeker again.
hopefully we'll do it again 2036.
We do, right? 2036, 10 years from now, who knows what the world's going to be like? And we're going to be talking about a decade from now.
We'll just be living in computers. We'll be in a data center at that point.
My avatar looks forward to speaking to your avatar in a decade. It sounds fantastic. Eric Bleeker from 24/7 Wall Street. Again, 247wallst.com. If you want to check out his site, he's got some really good coverage out there. I really highly encourage that. We are excited to pick the show back up on Monday, which will be getting into March now. Crazy, we're already in March of 2026. It'll be the day after our official recommendation gets launched for Seven Investing. That'll come out on the morning of March 1st. I'm going to be talking about the trend, not revealing the specific name because that's behind our paywall, but I'm going to be talking about the trend that I'm so interested in right now that leads me to the official recommendation of Seven Investings in March. That'll be on Monday's show. And again, if you want to see the recommendation, absolutely free, absolutely risk-free, seveninvesting.com/subscribe if you want to see all of our stock market coverage. So we'll be back again. I hope that everyone watching today appreciated the show as we talked about co-packaged optics and several of the companies on Eric's radar. We'll be with you again on Monday. Have a great weekend. We'll see you again next week.